Hello and welcome to From Rewatch with Love, a James Bond cinematic rewatch podcast. My name is Graham Stark. Joining me is Matt Wiggins.
Hi.
And today we are looking at Goldfinger, the third James Bond movie from 1964.
He's the man with the Midas touch.
So says our first real banger of an opening title song.
It sure does.
Do we have other business before we get into this? Again, we're recording this before the first episode has aired, so I have nothing to respond to or discuss based on viewer feedback. So I guess the only thing to do is to just get into discussing this third Bond movie that, again, much like the first two, started to lay groundwork for specific things that are just thought of as tenets of the series. It's so weird. I find myself reevaluating all the time. I remember that I said in Dr. No, I was surprised how much of what makes a Bond film was already there in Dr. No. And then watching From Russia with Love and now Goldfinger, I'm realizing how much more there is that every film is adding on top.
Yes. Yeah. This one, I think, is the one that really, this is the one that everybody points to as, like, this is the Bond movie, because this is the one I think that really locks in on the formula, so to speak. Mm-hmm. This is the really iconic one. It has the opening sequence that has nothing to do with the main plot. It has the actual full blown, hey, we figured out what we're doing for opening titles now kind of thing. And then it has all of the elements of a archetypical or prototypical Bond movie are in this movie. Mm-hmm. So it's like the first one that really solidifies on the formula, so to speak. As a result, it's very iconic in that regard. But you're right, building on all the elements that came before and that were introduced, and where things were prototypes in previous films, we have the first real production ready iteration of them in this film.
Yeah, let's start rolling these off the assembly line. Yeah. So 1964, with a budget of $3 million, adjusted for inflation, about $25.1 million.
Oh, they're moving up in the world.
Yeah, that's the budget of the first two movies combined. And starring Sean Connery in his third outing as Ian Fleming's 007, appearing against Honor Blackman as Pussy Galore. That's just her name. And they decided that they would call her that in the movie as well.
Remember when I said this movie has a lot of iconic elements of Bond films that everybody points to as this is the movie that did the thing?
Yeah, this is the movie with the really stupid name. And Gert Frobe as Auric Goldfinger, the eponymous Goldfinger, the villain of the piece. I'm pretty sure that Honor Blackman and Sean Connery are the only people not dubbed over in this movie.
I don't know. Felix Leiter might get off without an overdub.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Felix Leiter in the second of his many iterations, I believe.
Yep. So the box office for this one is pretty interesting when you take in the $3 million budget.
Yeah.
Talk about earning your money back.
$125 million in its day.
That's a lot.
Adjusted for inflation, that is just over $1 billion.
$1 billion on a inflation adjusted $25 million budget.
When I say we're talking in orders of magnitude here. When I say just over $1 billion, I mean $33 million over $1 billion.
Can you think of another movie earned $1 billion or more on a $25 million budget? How many movies have even earned $1 billion box office?
That's why the Bond films are the first international blockbusters, right? They were successful all around the world.
That is really, really impressive.
Yeah.
All right. Well, shall we start talking about the things that are in the film?
Yeah, let us begin with, as you say, the pre-title sequence that has nothing to do with the movie.
It sure doesn't.
Because the last one in From Russia with Love set up the Spectre assassin camp. And this pre-title is, as will be true for many Bond films, just sort of Bond just finishing an assignment, which is honestly a terrific method for making these movies feel so much bigger, making the world of Bond feel so much bigger that there's, you as the audience assume that what you're seeing here could have an entire other Bond film attached to it, right? You're
Yes.
just seeing this little sliver window into, this is Bond's every day. This is just how he operates. There's all these adventures that he's going on. And, what's the story? Whose place is he breaking into? What's he blowing up? Who are these people? And you don't need to know any of that. It's just Bond being cool and doing stuff.
Yeah, it's like putting the climactic stunt of the last movie at the beginning of this movie, except that the last movie doesn't exist. So this one starts, I think this one we open on basically just, what is it, like a set of docks, right?
Yeah, there's like a facility with some huge like oil silos or something, some kind of massive containers, and then we see this dock on the outside of a wall nearby. We assume it's somewhere vaguely tropical. There's palm trees.
And swimming up to the dock is what appears to be a very dead seagull, gradually making its way to the dock until it lifts out of the water, and we discover that Bond is wearing a decoy hat of a stuffed seagull, and he's wearing that above his wetsuit. And he is scuba diving and swimming up to the dock. So he mounts the dock, basically, strips off his seagull hat, fires a grappling hook over the wall into this facility. He scales the wall, but not without alerting a guard who he, up on the other side, manages to take out by sort of like jumping the guard.
I don't know how, because the guard is walking towards the wall and Bond jumps at him. Bond takes him by surprise from the front. Like, the guy should have seen him, but Bond leaps in from out of camera. He's just like, hammer space, haha!
Yeah, it's so good because, like, the guard clearly hears the grappling hook, right?
Yeah.
And turns around and looks, and he's like, oh, that's weird. Somebody shot a grappling hook over the wall. And then suddenly just Bond is on top of him.
It's very silly.
Yeah. So anyhow, Bond gets the drop on the guard, moves over to one of the tanks and finds a door in one of the tanks, which leads him into a drug lab. He sets up an array of explosives. Then does he get into another fight there? I don't think he does.
No, it's amazing. He just sneaks into this amazing, I'm going to talk about it again, this amazing Ken Adams interior that's only used for this scene. It's just this amazing interior space. This is what I mean about like building out the grandeur of these scenes. Like, what a cool set that is used for like 30 seconds and immediately exploded.
So he sets up the bomb, so to speak, and then makes his like exfiltration from this site. Upon escaping, strips off his wetsuit only to reveal that he is wearing the like iconic white tuxedo underneath. Pulls a carnation out of nowhere, tucks it into his lapel, and heads into town, blowing up the facility behind him.
He walks into the bar and then checks his watch, and then it blows up just as he arrives at the bar, and then everyone freaks out, runs out of the bar, and there's a belly dancer. There's a dancer who is providing entertainment who is upset with him that he has basically cost them business because everyone's running outside to go look at the explosion.
That's right. And
so he follows her into the back room because she knows who he is, I guess.
Yeah. I get the impression from their conversation that he, like, she was the like ostensible Bond girl of the previous adventure that this is the conclusion to.
Mm-hmm. Like,
they clearly have some sort of relationship beyond just like he shows up and is like, hey, we're gonna bone down now. So like he does follow her into the back, and they start to disrobe. They're going to hook up because it's the end of the adventure.
She conspicuously makes a point of going like, "Ow, I'm being poked by your gun," and then he's like,
yes,
"Oh right,
take that off."
Takes off his gun sling.
So he takes off his holster, hangs it by the bath, and they start making out. He notices that she's got her eyes open, and then in the reflection of her eyes, sees like a henchman in the background walking towards him with a billy club. So he like spins them around. The billy club guy hits the dancer with the billy club. She goes down. Then a fight ensues between Bond and the henchman, wherein the henchman ends up getting thrown into the bathtub, which is full of water, which is right next to where the gun is. So at the conclusion of this fight, the henchman falls into the bath, but then reaches for the gun holster, pulls out Bond's gun, and Bond grabs a space heater that he's standing next to and throws it into the bath, electrocuting the henchman. Proceeds to like gather his things and begin to leave the location as the woman he was with comes to, and quips that the situation is just shocking on his way out the door. And then we cut to credits.
One of the more dadly James Bond quips, but he delivers it very well.
He really does. So that's the opening for this one. And I truly don't think any aspect of this opening comes up at any point in the remainder of the film, except for the fact that the movie begins with Bond on vacation following his previous assignment.
Right. Yes, that's correct.
The opening.
Yes, the opening titles. So I misspoke last episode when referring to the opening titles of From Russia with Love. They were not, in fact, by Maurice Binder, who did the titles for Dr. No, and who would pick them back up in Thunderball and then do every Bond film from Thunderball through License to Kill. From Russia with Love and Goldfinger were both done by Robert Brownjohn, and both feature projecting onto women's bodies. In the case of From Russia with Love, they were projecting the actual titles onto the belly dancer. And in the case of Goldfinger, the titles are on screen as normal, but scenes from the movie are being projected onto a woman whose entire body is painted gold, which is kind of foreshadowing, but also looks really cool.
Uh-huh. And what about that song, though?
Yes, now we have a song. We don't have the sort of the From Russia with Love in the end credits of that movie. It's an absolute banger. This is Shirley Bassey absolutely belting it out. Apocryphally, she said at one point that she had to remove her supportive bustier to be able to hit the like 9-second sustained high note at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they went through like several iterations of like trying to figure out what they were going to do, and then they were like, let's just go absolutely ham and get Shirley Bassey to just do an absolute belter of a song.
Yeah. They kind of knocked it out of the park with this one. There's, I think, a pretty good chance that if you are a Bond fan and you are asked to think, what's the first Bond theme that comes to mind, this is probably it. There are a few others that are like pretty iconic, and it will depend a little bit on the era that you came into the Bond movies with. But this is, again, the like iconic Bond theme that every other Bond theme since has been sort of trying to live up to.
Yeah, I think this is definitely, I mean, preview of the power rankings from the end of the show. I think this is going to be on the high. It'll certainly, spoilers, it's going to be my top for now, obviously, but I think it's going to hold that position for some time and is going to end up certainly in the top 5, if not the top 3 at the end. Yeah,
we'll see where it nets out for me, but I like spoilers for the power ranking as well. This is definitely going to be my top so far.
Yeah, well, I mean, so far it's up against, again, a kind of a ballad style From Russia with Love and, God, I can't remember it now, Under the Mango Tree.
That's right.
So, not really a strong field as of yet. But after these terrific opening titles, we get to Miami Beach. There's like a plane, one of those banners. Remember they used to pull banners behind airplanes?
They still do that from time to time. You just need to live in a large enough city that they do that. But yes, they do. They open on some great, like, wide establishing shots of Miami.
I have to give props, as you say, to these establishing shots. There's one shot, it's a helicopter shot that starts fairly wide around this hotel. It's an unbroken shot that continues in gets closer and closer, pans around the building to see a pool deck, keeps going, and gets even closer and closer, zoomed in on a man on top of the diving board, who I presume was given a cue, who perfectly like does a great dive, like right on cue, and the camera zooms in, and as soon as he hits the water, cuts to an underwater shot of him entering the pool, and then pans away from an underwater. It's because you can see under the pool because there's a window leading into it, and pans over to Felix Leiter, who then begins the scene. It's a great scene setting establishing shot, because you remember I was talking about that the last time, that I was like, in From Russia with Love they actually show off Istanbul, and this is like this is such a good opener.
Yeah. So as you say, the scene opens on Felix Leiter, who is at this hotel to meet up with James Bond, who, as we previously mentioned, is on vacation in Miami after his previous mission. And Felix relates to Bond that M has sent orders to divert his vacation slightly in order to observe bullion dealer Auric Goldfinger, who is also staying at the same hotel. So Bond and Felix spot Goldfinger in the pool area, playing cards at a table with an acquaintance. They observe him for a while, and Bond comes to the determination that Goldfinger is cheating at gin rummy. He's using like a hearing aid device that he's sort of passing off as being to help his hearing, but he's actually using it as a transceiver to receive information from like a plant that he has up on a balcony, who is looking at his opponent's cards with binoculars. And they set the scene up by like Goldfinger arrives at the table to play cards with his acquaintance, and he's like, "Oh, you ready to play cards today?" He's like, "Yes, but can I have my favorite seat?" And the guy's like, "Oh yes, of course, here you always have to have your favorite seat," and like moves without that ever appearing suspicious at all. Anyhow, so Bond determines that Goldfinger is cheating and decides he's going to have some fun with him.
I love that Bond hasn't been told why he has to look at Goldfinger, right? M has just told him, keep an eye on this dude. And Bond's like, cool, I'm going to go cause problems on purpose.
Yeah, he immediately decides he's cheating at cards. I'm going to screw with him.
Yeah. And it's very like, why? I thought you were good at this. Why? You're a terrible spy. Interesting production note. It's really obvious if you watch the scene while you're aware of this, but Sek Linder, who plays Felix Leiter, is the only actor who was actually on location in Miami.
Sorry, what?
Yes. The pool deck was recreated as a set at Pinewood Film Studios. It's super obvious if you watch it and realize that it's a set. And all the shots of Bond and Goldfinger's partner are either on the set or rear projected with video of the thing. The only person you ever see fully walking around the pool deck in a absolutely obvious on location thing is Felix Leiter. There is a shot of Goldfinger coming down the stairs from the hotel, and it's a body double.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they did so much stuff with rear projection in these early Bond movies. It's absolutely wild. The notion that they just were like, all right, well, he's the only one that we need on location to make sure we get this establishing shot, so we'll do the rest at Pinewood. And it's like, why?
I don't know. I guess building the set was cheaper than flying everybody to Miami for a week.
I guess. And the other note, of course, is Auric Goldfinger. Auric meaning like gold, like the word auric. AU is gold, the symbol for gold on the periodic table, and auric like means gold. So his name is like Goldfinger. Also, by the way, the name Goldfinger is directly from an architect by the name of Erno Goldfinger, who apocryphally built a house near Ian Fleming's that Fleming did not like. And so he decided to make him a villain in one of the novels. That's one of those stories that's like been told, that it's like, oh, he got revenge on this architect by naming a bad guy in the James Bond film, and that's never actually been confirmed by Fleming. So it's a fun story. But Gert Frobe speaking of apocryphal stuff that I think they put around because it's a better story, didn't speak amazing English, or rather had a very thick accent, which they tell you on the Blu-ray they didn't really know until he showed up on set, and I'm confident that's not true. But as with many other actors in the early Bond movies, he is mostly dubbed over by stage actor Michael Collins. He does have a few lines of his own speaking English in the movie, which I had a hard time picking out, honestly. So he nailed the lines that he did say, but
Nice.
also when the movie was dubbed into German, he dubbed his own lines.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, that's good. So where did we leave off? Bond was going to mess with Goldfinger.
Yep.
Bond heads up into the hotel to try and get to Goldfinger's suite, because upon discovering that he's cheating at cards, he has also found that like he's also determined that there's like he's getting help, and he's getting radio information telling him how that like or what cards to play. So he determines that the plant is probably up in Goldfinger's suite, so he heads up to Goldfinger's suite. In the hall, there's a housekeeping woman who is like, "Is this Goldfinger's room?" She's like, "Well, yes, sir." And he just like grabs her key card and like pulls her over to the door, uses it to unlock the door, and then sort of like sends her on her way.
Yeah. And she's like, "Oh, okay.
Sure, why not?" So Bond busts into Goldfinger's room and finds there is a woman reclining on the patio with a pair of binoculars and a radio. He walks over, introduces himself. She introduces herself as Jill Masterson, and Bond takes advantage of the situation to blackmail Goldfinger. He basically gets on the radio and says, "Listen, Goldfinger, if you don't want me to out the fact that you're cheating, you're gonna start losing right now. What do we say? I think it's $10,000." He's like, get to work losing $10,000. Just play until you're in the hole, and then turns off the radio, heads off to the bedroom with Jill, and Bond and Jill proceed to have a fun afternoon filled with banging and bottles of champagne, until such a time as Bond goes for more champagne, discovers that their champagne has warmed up, which simply will not do. One does not drink Dom Perignon at an incorrect temperature, at anything less than the perfect temperature. So he heads over to the fridge. At the fridge, he is attacked by Oddjob, Goldfinger's assistant,
who we only see in silhouette and in, well, like, I guess, hand. The very popular human subdual tactic of TV and movies of this era, which is a quote-unquote judo chop to the head and neck area.
Yes.
and then we see Oddjob in silhouette as he leaves the room.
Yeah. It's enough in this scene to know that it's Oddjob when you see him later. Like, if you're watching this movie for the first time, when they do introduce Oddjob, you'll be like, "Oh, it's definitely that guy in the hotel room." But you're right, he is sort of like only in silhouette and sort of off shot. At any rate, Bond wakes up, he comes to, discovers that not only is Jill dead, but she has been covered from head to toe in gold paint, having apparently died from skin suffocation.
Which is, you'll be shocked to learn, I'm sure, not a thing.
Yeah.
In the following scene, talking to M, he says that when performers have to paint themselves all over in paint, that it's he says it with like full confidence, that it's like, oh, it's totally fine as long as you leave a bare patch of skin in the middle of the lower back so that the skin can breathe. And he just says this complete horse crap lie, like it's absolutely factual. And for years, everybody was like, "Oh yeah, I guess I saw in James Bond's skin suffocation. That's a thing." It's like, no, it's not. It's complete lie. If you're interested, they tested it on an episode of Mythbusters. That's not why we know it's a lie. It's just not true. But in the movie, they're like, "Oh yeah, yep, it's just it's skin suffocation." But boy, though, what a visual. Like this was, of course, a big part of the marketing for the movie and everything, having Jill Masterson played by Shirley Eaton. It was just like, this was on the cover of Life magazine in 1964. Like this, the image of the woman painted in gold, right, was such a gripping visual for the movie.
Yeah. This dead woman on the cover of Life magazine. So yeah, as you mentioned, he explains this to M. He returns to London, explains this to M, and at this point he is given a mission. We learn they suspect that Goldfinger is amassing riches by smuggling gold across borders, but they've never been able to prove it.
He's being told this by Colonel Smithers, an official from the Bank of England, in just an absolutely needlessly opulent dining room.
It's a great dining room, though.
What a great set.
It's one of the things I like about these movies, and it'll come up again later, at least at this era, is like all of the British, like all of the locations that are like British intelligence or British officials or whatnot are these ridiculously opulent. I don't know what the era is, but like, you know it when you see it. It's like this dining room, or there's another scene similar to this in the next film, but like classic furniture and big tables and like
lots of marble and gold accents and columns.
Yes. Yeah, like marble and these big columns and like fine woodwork and gold accenting and, you know, all the like the sterling silver dishware and that kind of thing. It like very, very fancy upscale accoutrements to the scene. They provide a very stark contrast against the sets that like the bad people use.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah,
always have like really stark lines, and like the British places are always like curvy and like carved and whatnot, and like the stylization of the like evil layers are always like very stark lines and much more modern architecture. And you know, the sets that you've been talking about have a look to them, but you would never mistake those sets for the sets that are like, this is where the British intelligence do their debriefs. They maintain a really clear line between like what the good guys' places look like and what the bad guys' places look like. And this is a really good example of that in this particular scene. Very sort of British aristocracy kind of look to those sets.
It's particularly true of, I mean, we see Goldfinger's place later, and it's an amazing set as well with a lot of really harsh lines. It's particularly true of Spectre, which is interesting because Spectre is not mentioned in this movie. Spectre is not a part of this. Is, you know, referenced in the first movie, very obvious in the second movie, that show up again in the next one. But Goldfinger stands on its own. He stands on his own as a villain detached from Spectre.
Yes. So at dinner, we learn that they suspect Goldfinger of smuggling gold, and Bond is given his assignment of trying to prove that Goldfinger is a gold smuggler, and they provide him a bar of Nazi gold in order to accomplish this mission. They pull one out of the vault and are like, we're going to give you this gold bar, and you're going to use it as bait to try and see if you can infiltrate Goldfinger's operation and gather evidence that he is in fact smuggling gold, at which point we will shut him down. And in a great little bit at the end of the scene of just M continually never having any of Bond's nonsense, Bond is like, all right, cool, and like goes to pick up the gold bar to take it with him, and M is like, you will check that out from Q Branch tomorrow morning with the rest of your equipment.
Speaking of which, we then go to a scene with Desmond Llewellyn as Q, and this is the first, as we said earlier, setting up the very quintessential scene with Q, where not only is Bond getting his equipment, but he's seeing all the other equipment that the boffins at Q Branch are working on, all these like things happening in the background. There's an air of slapstick to some of it, and also the greater antagonism between Q and Bond, you know, a friendly antagonism, but basically Q does not suffer any of Bond's crap. I forgot to mention, this is directed by Guy Hamilton, who would go on to direct many, many Bond films, but this was his first outing before Terrence Young would come back and direct Thunderball. And Guy Hamilton told Llewellyn to, you know, inject a bit of humor into the role and basically be, you know, it's like, no, you're not putting up with any of Bond's, you know, childishness, essentially.
Yeah, I like I like this scene a lot as well because as you mentioned, you get the greater sort of visit into Q Branch and all the things, all the silly things that they're working on that add some levity to the film that aren't necessarily things that Bond is going to interact with or use. It calls back a little bit to a scene in From Russia with Love where the like Spectre training camp, there's like the training ground and you can see all the assassins being trained in the background.
Yeah, doing things like dodge a flamethrower training.
I mean, it feels like that's the sort of thing that'll come up in the field, maybe.
It seems like really awkward to train for.
The people who are just like running along a wall as a guy with a machine gun is firing live ammo at them. Here's your bullet dodge training. But that, again, in the way that a lot of the things in the first two films feel like prototypes of things that would come along and be solidified later, that scene feels like a prototype of this a bit, where now we're seeing what goes on at Q Branch, and it's like, whoa, we're testing a bulletproof vest by having a guy put it on and just shooting him with a machine gun. Or here's this other silly device that we came up with in a writer's room meeting but couldn't fit into the script. So anyhow, in this scene, Bond basically gets his primary gadget for the movie, which is the iconic Aston Martin DB5. And he is given the run through of all the various things that the Aston Martin can do.
Aston Martin were very wary of giving them these cars because they gave them two cars, one to use largely untouched and one to like do a bunch of weird modifications to. And Aston Martin were like, all right, but you know, you're going to have to pay extra for, you know, for whatever. And let me tell you, the James Bond movies never paid for cars again.
Yeah, no doubt. Although if I bought an Aston Martin DB5 following this and it didn't have a bulletproof plate that raised out of the trunk, I would be deeply, deeply disappointed. I want my Aston Martin to have an ejector seat. The various things it can do, it's got guns. The windows are bulletproof, but then it also has the armor plate that rises in front of the bulletproof window to stop bullets.
For more powerful bullets.
Like, they never explain why that armor plate is there when they note specifically, because it comes up that the windows are themselves already bulletproof. The exhaust pipes shoot an oil slick. There's smoke. It has an ejector seat in the passenger seat.
It has rotating license plates, which apparently came up because the director got a ticket once and thought it would be fun.
Oh, nice. Yes, valid in all countries.
Yeah.
It has the like tire popping things, the little struts that come out of the wheels. Although I don't think they mention I think they just do the setup of like, this car has a lot of gadgets on it and here are some big ones, and then the car can just basically do whatever he wants it to for the remainder of the movie, or at least for the remainder of the car's tenure in the movie, because I don't think they actually mention the wheel things in the rundown of the car, but it totally doesn't matter. It's a gadget car. It has gadgets on it.
Yeah, we just assume that that's a thing that these cars have always had and James doesn't need a rundown of it. It's very Ben-Hur when it comes up.
Yes, yeah. Oh, he also gets two tracking devices. There's a little baby one, and then there's a bigger one about the size of a lighter, which come up later in the film. But the little tiny one is meant to fit in his shoe. So he hops in the car, he drives off, he arranges to meet Goldfinger. He sort of like arranges his way into a golf game against Goldfinger. He basically signs up as a solo to play and arranges it so that Goldfinger is in need of a +1 and gets paired with Goldfinger to go out on the course and play a game of golf. They decide to bet on the golf game, and Bond just sort of like, not super subtle about his intentions. He sort of like plays it off as like, oh, what a happy accident, we're playing together. And then is like, hey, I have some gold that I need dealt with, and just drops his bar of Nazi gold onto the green in front of Goldfinger.
Yeah, because Bond is playing off this scene like he is, I guess, a peer of Goldfinger, that he also works in gold and that he needs some gold, you know, moved. And he's heard that Goldfinger's the person to talk to about that. Sort of unknown to Bond that Oddjob absolutely knows who he is, because Oddjob is the guy that knocked him out in Miami. And so that Goldfinger also knows that this guy is obviously trying to get information out of him. So Bond thinks he's being supremely clever, but Goldfinger already knows what's going on here.
Yeah. So Goldfinger sort of plays along with it a little bit, but again, you're right. Clearly knows that Bond is like playing him and challenges him to like, let's make this interesting. You wager your bar of gold, and I will wager the value of the bar of gold in response. Strict rules of golf. Let's go. And then proceeds to cheat. He hits a ball off into the weeds, and Oddjob drops another ball for him so that he doesn't lose his ball and doesn't have to count an extra stroke. Bond gets wise to this because Bond also decides to cheat.
Oh yeah, they both do. Yeah, it's a great conversation with his caddy, who of course is on Bond's side, because he's like, Oddjob drops the ball and goes like, because Oddjob doesn't talk, and he's like, hey, I found the ball, and the caddy's like, what does he say? If that's his ball, I'm like someone. Oh, what's the line? I don't know. It's like I'm the Queen of England, or that kind of
something
line,
like that. Yeah.
And Bond's like, well, I know it's not his ball because I'm standing on his ball.
And the caddy is like not just cool with this, but like actively impressed by it.
The caddy is 100% on side.
And so anyhow, Bond is then like, all right, let's have a little bit of fun with Goldfinger. And what was the name of at any rate, for people who don't play golf, when you're playing golf, your balls typically have the brand name and a number on them. So you have a ball that's like Titleist 1. In a pack, you might get 3 Titleist 1s, 3 Titleist 2s, 3 Titleist 3s, and 3 Titleist 4s, right? And for the course of your game, you pick a ball and you use that ball. And the number is so that you can, because people lose balls on the course all the time, if you find a ball, you are able to identify it as your own ball. It's relatively unlikely, given the array of brands out there, that if you're playing a Titleist 1, everybody plays that, but it's relatively unlikely that you're going to find a ball with the same combination of branding and numbering in the area where you hit your ball. So you can find your ball. I don't remember the brand name of the balls in this game, but at any rate, Bond proceeds. Goldfinger is playing with a 1. Bond, on one of the holes, picks Goldfinger's ball out of the cup and replaces it with a 7 and passes it back to Goldfinger, like palms the real ball and passes the fake ball off to Goldfinger at the hole. And then they play through the remainder of the game, at which point Goldfinger wins. Like, he basically lets Goldfinger win by a stroke at the end of the game, and then goes to retrieve Goldfinger's ball. And as he pulls up the ball and looks at it, he's like, it starts with an S.
Slazenger.
Slazenger, that's right. You were playing a Slazenger 1, right? And he's like, yes. Well, this is a Slazenger 7. You must have picked up the wrong ball somewhere on the last screen. And of course, you did say strict rules of golf, so that means you lose the hole and the match. And Goldfinger, of course, gets like super angry and storms off, and they proceed back to his Rolls Royce, where Goldfinger writes Bond a check for the value of the gold bar,
which is like 5,000 pounds.
Yeah, it's like not cheap. It's like 5,000 pounds, but at the time basically tells Bond, is like, listen, I know what you're up to, I know who you are, this is the cost of our interaction, but if you show up in my affairs again, I am going to have Oddjob here kill the hell out of you. And they demonstrate by Oddjob using his hat, taking his hat off, which is a steel-rimmed derby hat, and he throws it like a frisbee at a statue, and it decapitates the statue.
to which Bond sort of muses like, the golf course can't be too pleased with what you're doing here. And Goldfinger, very idly, casually, wearily almost, is just like, oh, it's fine, I own the course. But yeah, I love Goldfinger in this scene. I mean, through the whole movie, he's so good, and I love in this scene, he's like, all right, we've met twice now, right? And just letting Bond know, because this is, everyone's like, all right, cards on the table, right? Like, we've met twice now. Do not let there be a third, for your own safety. Just leave me alone. Because he figures, all right, I'll pay him, I'll give him this 5,000 pounds, and I will threaten him, and then that's the last I need to worry about it. And so Bond also, because he's also doing cards on the table, he's like, oh, by the way, this is yours. Chucks a Slazenger 1 back at Oddjob, who crushes it with his bare hands.
And then they drive off. It's a great scene. That whole scene is really good. At this point, Goldfinger heads off to Switzerland, and Bond just follows him. Like, Bond is on the case at this point, so he follows him.
He put the tracking device in Goldfinger's car.
That's right. Yeah, he did put the tracking device in Goldfinger's car, the like lighter sized one. So this is he's following him to Switzerland. He gets to the airport, and Goldfinger is loading his Rolls Royce onto a plane.
Yeah, just a normal British Airways. It's called like a British Airways carrier. It's like a passenger / cargo plane, and it's just fly your effing car to mainland Europe. Sure, why not? That seems so costly.
Well, he's got tons of money.
I know.
He's
but
Goldfinger.
Still.
He's got all the money, and he will have even more money if his plans go, although we don't know that yet. So anyhow, he loads his car onto the plane and takes it to Switzerland. Bond follows, presumably doing the same thing, because of course he has the DB5 in Switzerland.
The guy at the airport tells Bond that he'll get Bond on the next flight that leaves in like half an hour or something. Like, it's not that long between flights, so presumably they gloss over this, but presumably Bond lands and picks up the trail after not too long, because the radar has a range of like some large number of miles.
Yeah, it was soon enough that Goldfinger wouldn't get out of range before Bond arrived. So he follows him to Switzerland, just basically tootling through the mountains, and discovers that they're being followed again. It's like Goldfinger stops at a lookout, and then Bond stops at a different lookout further up the mountain to sort of observe what Goldfinger is doing at the lookout down below. And then the person that's following them stops at yet another lookout even higher up the mountain and fires a shot that pings off the ground next to Bond, which has Bond concerned that somebody's trying to assassinate him. So he then proceeds to track down the person who took a shot at him. He basically, he chases down the car, and this is where the Ben-Hur style like projections from the wheel come in, because he basically disables her car by tearing up both of her tires and the entire side panel of her car, driving her off the road. But does it in such a way that their cars are clearly not in contact. So he pulls up behind her, like she gets driven off the road and crashes, and he pulls up behind her and gets out and is like, "Oh, are you all right? I've never seen anything like that. A double blowout. Wow, you're lucky to be alive." And she sort of buys it.
Yeah, with both tires going out, you could sort of play off, but there's also the massive, horrible metallic gash running the length of the car. That's just sort of like, how do you explain that?
You don't. No. You just use the power of swagger to sell your story, I guess. But anyhow, he offers her a ride. I think she sort of goes along with it. I don't think she's really fooled, but she goes along with it because he's not obviously trying to kill her. And he offers her a ride back to the mechanic. She grabs her bag and she grabs a gun case that has her initials on it. And Bond, of course, immediately identifies this as a gun case, although she plays it off as something else. I don't remember exactly what she plays it off as, but she doesn't admit that it's a gun case. He takes her to a gas station and then proceeds to invite her to have another meeting at some point, although she I believe spurns his advances at this point and is like, "No, I'll be fine on my own from here. Have a good day." And dismisses him, and he hops back in his car and heads off to continue his mission.
He notices also that the name that she gave does not match up with the initials on the gun case. Like, the first name is the same, but the last name is different.
That's right, because it's TM on the case.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I think it comes up next time we see her, but it is revealed that this is Tilly Masterson, Jill Masterson's sister, who is trying to get revenge on Goldfinger for painting her sister gold.
Yes.
Which is, by the way, impressive that Tilly was able to figure out what happened, who did it, and then get to Switzerland and also be tracking him down with a gun. Fair on you.
Yeah, fair play to Tilly. And you're right, it does come up basically in the next scene, because Bond that night goes to sneak into Goldfinger's plant in Switzerland to try and figure out what's going on. Bond sneaks into Goldfinger's plant that night. He basically, by investigating and sort of skulking around the plant, figures out how Goldfinger is smuggling the gold. He sees that Goldfinger is explaining to a Chinese physicist who is visiting the plant that he essentially rebuilds and disassembles his Rolls Royce every time he makes a trip. And they build the entire bodywork of the Rolls Royce out of gold. And just by nature of his like predilection to take his Rolls Royce with him everywhere he goes, he can build the car out of gold, take it to where he's going, have them disassemble it, and then basically like drive a real one back so that no one is the wiser.
Yeah, because essentially his game, as far as anyone knows at this point, obviously there becomes a larger plot as it goes on, is that Goldfinger is a licensed international jeweler, and so is allowed by various international treaties to run modest smelting facilities in many different countries. And he also has gold in banks in many different countries, and he keeps gold of his keeps popping up and being bought and sold in ways that make him more and more money depending on the markets in different parts of the world. They just don't understand how the gold keeps appearing where it has a higher price. Right. And so what's being revealed here is that he's using his smelting facilities under his very legal position as a jeweler to be able to do all this gold stuff, which is, you know, as a Bond film goes, very low stakes.
Yes. It's very, like, at this point, the story is very, like, what's the word?
Goldfinger's full plot isn't even really end of the world. I actually love Goldfinger's full plot, but we'll get there. Brief aside, Chinese, apparently communist nuclear fission specialist, Mr. Ling, played by Burt Kwok, who played Kato in the Pink Panther movies.
So while speaking to this guy, Bond also overhears Goldfinger talk about, like, this thing that he is doing that is very important. We don't get a lot of details about it, but we hear the drop of the name of this Operation Grand Slam. That sort of piques Bond's interest, but we don't get any more information about it other than the fact that it's something that Goldfinger is planning. So Bond then tries to exit the facility, and on his way out, he encounters Tilly again, once again trying to kill Goldfinger. This is where he puts together that she is Jill's sister and has been like hunting Goldfinger to try and get revenge for killing Jill. He basically stops her from doing it at the time because he's like, oh, you'll let everybody know we're here. I need to get out of here. Like, now is not the time. Don't do that. But she sets off an alarm, and that alerts everybody to the fact that they're there. So there's a sort of an extensive chase scene where Bond tries to escape from the facility. He hops in his DB5. This is basically the scene where he uses all the gadgets that were previously described in the DB5. He stops the car. He releases Tilly into the woods and tries to like cover her, but Oddjob hops out and kills her with his hat, and Bond is captured. They do manage to trap him in the car, and at one point one of the henchmen ends up in the side seat of his car, which Bond uses the ejector seat to eject him out of the car so that he can get loose again. The scene basically ends with Bond's car, like Bond losing the chase. He cannot escape them, and here we have yet another incredibly iconic scene. Bond gets captured and taken back to the facility where he is tied to a solid gold table underneath a laser. Goldfinger is like, here, let me show you my laser, and proceeds to turn it on, and it starts to creep up the table towards Bond, threatening to bisect him up the middle. And Bond starts trying to talk his way out of the situation. This is where the iconic line, "Goldfinger, do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die," comes from. And he manages to talk his way out of this situation by dropping the fact that he already knows about Operation Grand Slam and that he has already related this information to MI6, which is flagrant lie. Goldfinger is like, you're right. You are more valuable to me alive than dead, because if I keep you alive, I can use you to make MI6 believe that everything is under control and keep them off my case.
Yeah, because the concern is that if Bond doesn't report in or dies, then MI6 will send another 00. He said 008, I think, is like, 008 replaces me. And then Goldfinger has a bigger problem. Whereas if he just sort of keeps Bond alive and makes it look like everything's okay, then there's nothing to worry about. And Goldfinger's not stupid either, because Bond's kind of desperate. And he's like, well, what about Operation Grand Slam? And Mr. Ling is sort of like, he's like, how does he know about that? And Goldfinger's like, those are 2 words that you might have overheard with no further context.
Which is exactly what happened.
Yep. And he's like, I don't think you know a thing. And then Bond is like, do you really think you could take that chance? And Goldfinger eventually is like, I guess not. Fine.
Yeah.
Originally, this was supposed to be a circular saw, which is not nearly as exciting. But, we're getting into the mid 60s. They're, more sort of sci-fi. And it was more exciting and interesting for it to be an incredibly powerful metal cutting laser than just a saw.
Yeah.
This is such a classic scene of the villain, monologuing, the one-liner especially, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. So good. Yeah, this whole scene is excellent. No, it's not worth talking about. I wanted to talk about the little old lady with the machine gun in the last scene, but it's like,
bring it up
real quick before we move on. In that car chase scene, after they capture Bond, after Tilly is killed, and they capture Bond, and they're driving him back, they go through this toll gate, I guess, which like with a little old Swiss lady in like a house. It looks like she lives there, and they pull up to the gate and she's like, oh, okay, and like dusts her hands off from like the bread she's making or something, and goes out and raises the gate, and they're like, hello, and she waves to them, and then they continue on towards Goldfinger's place, and then Bond uses the ejector seat to get the guy in the car out of there so that he can turn around and try to escape, and he drives back towards that toll gate, and the little old lady comes out of there with a machine gun and just starts firing. And it's so funny because she's so small and her whole body is just as she's shooting this machine gun. It's so funny. Eventually, yeah. I mean, I believe that ends up being a big part of why he isn't able to escape, because he's not expecting that.
He ends up turning back into the compound to avoid the machine gun fire. So Bond's been captured. His life has been spared, but Goldfinger still needs to do something with him. So at this point, we have a full-blown location change that will carry us through basically the remainder of the film, as Bond is transported on Goldfinger's private jet to his stud farm in Kentucky.
Yeah, what an interesting choice of. I mean, there's a reason, obviously, but it's sort of like Kentucky.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. And Bond is tranquilized at the end of the last scene, and then sort of groggily wakes up as the focus resolves into an image of Honor Blackman introducing herself as the character of Pussy Galore. To which Bond responds, I must be dreaming. Because even James Bond thinks that Pussy Galore is kind of a silly name.
Yeah. So Pussy Galore, we learn in the scene, is Goldfinger's personal pilot, like she's flying the plane. Anyhow, he is taken to Kentucky, put in a cell. He basically sits in this cell. Along the way, at some point along the way, he activates the little baby remote beacon.
Oh yeah, there's an amazing sequence where he is sort of like, do you have my luggage? Because I had luggage, and she's like, yeah, it's all there. Because he's a guest of Goldfinger's now, and so he asks to use the bathroom, and the flight attendant tries to spy on him through many different. She looks through this little peephole, and he figures it's there, so he hangs his shirt up over the door so that she can't look through. So then she moves to her backup keyhole that looks through the one-way glass in the medicine cabinet, so he sprays shaving foam over it, and then activates his remote homing beacon in the shoe, and then gets ready and now has an active homing beacon for when they land in Kentucky. Brief aside about Honor Blackman. So she was no stranger to being in sort of spy drama, lighthearted spy drama. Matt, you're You're a fan of the Avengers. You and James do a whole podcast about it.
Wrong Avengers, but yeah.
Exactly, yeah. The Avengers was a British spy TV series that ran for, 6 or 7 seasons. Every episode was an hour long, starring for his whole run Patrick Macnee, who would later appear in a Bond film and indeed narrates all of the behind the scenes specials on the Blu-rays, which is kind of funny. Yeah. And most notably, Patrick Macnee's co-star Diana Rigg as Miss Emma Peel. Diana Rigg herself would appear as Bond's co-star in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and most probably better known to television audiences recently as, what's her name? She was in Game of Thrones. She was the wonderful, awesome, very old lady, Tyrell. She was the elder Tyrell.
Yes.
In Game of Thrones. And she's just so great. Sorry, I really love Diana Rigg. So she was on the show for 2 seasons. Prior to Diana Rigg, Honor Blackman was the other half of the Avengers, opposite Patrick Macnee for 2 seasons. The first season of the Avengers was Patrick Macnee and a male co-star, and then Honor Blackman for 2 seasons, and then Diana Rigg, and then Tara King. No, the character's name is Tara King. And then another actress for the final season of the show. It's sort of unclear if Honor Blackman left the show to do Goldfinger or if she was going to do 2 seasons and it happened to sort of line up. But the producers wanted Honor Blackman for this part to the extent that they wrote in that Pussy Galore knows judo because Honor Blackman knows judo, so that it was sort of like, oh, this is the perfect role for me. And they're like, yes, good. I suppose it's worth mentioning, in the book, the character is absolutely a lesbian, not bi, a lesbian. And in the movie, she makes reference to how she's immune to James's charms. It is not laid out that she is not interested in men. She just says, I'm immune to your charms, which very much proves not to be the case. And it's really stupid. And in fact, even in its day, they got criticized for it to the extent that they lampshade it somewhat in the following movie, Thunderball. So we're gonna give the benefit of the doubt that Pussy Galore in the movie is bi, because otherwise it's way worse.
Yeah.
But that comes up some scenes from now.
Yeah. I want to finish out the Avengers cross-pollination before we depart completely from that line.
Oh, you should, by the way, you should go watch, not you, Matt, you are aware of it, but you should go watch the Avengers. It's a really fun show. It's very lighthearted. Some of them are very silly, but it's, 1960s British TV, hour-long episode. So, like 45-minute episodes, and every episode is just, a little fun romp, and Patrick Macnee is great, and Honor Blackman and Diana Rigg are great, and definitely worth watching.
Yep. What's not worth watching is the late 90s, early 2000s cinematic remake of the Avengers
with Ralph Fiennes and Uma Thurman.
Yeah, and none other than Sean Connery, who plays the villain in that movie.
I forgot he was in that movie. Oh my God. What? I completely forgot he was in that movie.
He sure was. And it's probably for the best that you have forgotten. That movie is not good.
Wow, yeah, Sean Connery is. I'm looking it up now. Sir August de Winter. Oh no.
Whose plan is to manipulate the weather, as I recall, and who spends most of the third act of the movie in a giant Beanie Baby costume.
I love that the opening paragraph, the above the line paragraph on the Wikipedia entry for the 1998 Avengers film ends with, the film was a box office bomb, only grossing $55 million against a $60 million budget. It also received extremely negative reviews from critics, with some considering it one of the worst films ever made.
I remember seeing it in theaters.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's not a good movie. Welcome to From Rewatch with Love, our podcast covering the 1998 film Avengers. All right, so Bond is in Kentucky. He is captured in a cell. His beacon is going off. So the CIA pick up his beacon, and in a scene that I love with Felix, Felix's like associate is like, his beacon is going off. Shouldn't we shouldn't we go check on him? And he's like, no, I'm sure he's got everything in hand. He'll call for us if he needs us. So like Bond is basically sitting in this cell with nothing to do, completely like at the mercy of everybody around him, having turned on the beacon for the purpose of like, I'm in trouble, come help. And like Felix is like, nah, he's probably just like up to his neck in women. Let's just let him deal with it, and we will like he'll make sure we know when he needs our help. But anyhow, so Bond manages to break out of his cell by tricking the guard who is so that he's in this like sparse cell, and he proceeds to start pacing back and forth basically from the back of the cell to the front, in and out of view of the guard who is standing outside the door staring at the cell. So he'll like walk out of view and then walk right up to the window in the door and like smile at the guard, and then turn around and walk back the other way, and then walk back up and smile at the guard, and then turn around and walk away. And then he walks up, winks at the guard, and like sinks out of the window towards the floor and never comes back. And at this point the guard is like, where did he go? And like pulls out his gun and goes over to the door to like try and figure out where Bond is. And he opens the door. The room is empty, and it cuts to a reverse shot. And the guy is like walked in the door with his gun, is looking for Bond in this empty cell. And you can see Bond is like stretched, like he's climbed up above the door and is stretched across the ceiling, like holding himself above the door. And he like drops off the ceiling onto the guard and subdues him and breaks out of the cell. He then proceeds to sort of skulk around in the undercarriage of Goldfinger's ranch and finds his way to what is apparently a room with hydraulics and things. And there's like a ceiling above it that has a concave that he can put his head in and sort of look out. And while this is all happening, Goldfinger is meeting with the heads of many like mafia families or organized crime heads from around the US, who is brought in, and he's basically like, I've brought you all here because you all provided materials that I need for Operation Grand Slam. I'm here to pay you for the services that you've provided, but if I can rely on your support even further, I have a proposition for you. Allow me to detail all of what Operation Grand Slam is. And so he says, like, he pitches them on the idea that he's planning to break into Fort Knox and steal all the gold.
What I love is he refers to it because he says, I will pay you the $1 million. I owe each of you $1 million, and I'll pay you that. Or if I can get your help with what I'm doing, I can pay you $10 million each. And everyone's ears prick up at that. And he's like, I'll just get it from my bank tomorrow. And they're like, it's Sunday, the banks aren't open. And he's like, my bank will be open. And then this room, this amazing room, this set is so wonderful, and this massive ranch house that's all wood and stone and just great ceilings and angles, like you said, then transforms. Boy, is this purpose built. His pool table flips around, rotates on the floor, and turns into a control panel. The floor opens up, and there's this little diorama of Fort Knox. And it's like,
that like
you don't,
up.
Yeah, like you don't need what, like this room is designed so that he can give this presentation, which presumably is only going to happen once. And it's so unnecessary, and it's terrific, right? Like,
yeah.
When else are you ever going to need to show a bunch of people all at once a wall-sized image of an aerial photo of Fort Knox and then a scale diorama of Fort Knox? Especially when we see underground where Bond is, the infrastructure surrounding raising this model, like just the work hours alone that must have gone into this room is absolutely ridiculous. And that's what I love about the character of Goldfinger. That's what makes him so great as a Bond villain, is like, this is unreasonable.
I think one of my favorite bits of this scene is like all the organized crime dudes don't get along They're like, oh, why have you brought us all here? And then the room starts to change, and there's like several indignant quips in like American tough guy accents from them, being like, no, what's going on? Oh, I'm here in the circus. Like I don't remember the exact lines, but they're like extreme indignance about having to be moved around the room to see this, and Goldfinger just does not care at all. He's like, look at my delightful model. The whole scene, like the whole construction of that scene, is super fun. I like it a lot. Everybody's like hamming it up to 11 in that scene. It's great. So anyhow, he rolls out his plan, and the plan that he tells all of the mafia heads is that he plans to break into Fort Knox and steal all the gold. His plan is that, based on the things that they've brought him this nerve gas, Delta 9 nerve gas. They can deploy it into the atmosphere. It will, I think he says it will knock everybody out.
Correct.
They will be rendered unconscious, he says, for 24 hours, and it will dissipate from the air in 15 minutes. And he's like, at that point, with your support, we can roll in and like basically just spend 24 hours looting gold out of the place, and when we are done, I will pay you all $10 million in gold bullion, and you can be on your way. And Bond, as he's listening in on this, gets caught.
He's written a note down, though. He's written down some key pieces of information about when the attack is going to happen and what's going to go on, and then puts it in the pocket of his suit, and then gets caught. But that becomes really relevant. He gets caught actually by Pussy Galore, who finds him skulking around underneath the model, which he's poked his head up through specifically he's looking up through the bottom of the Fort Knox building.
Yeah, and the windows are clear so we can see into the room. Yeah, Pussy Galore finds him in the room, walks up, he's standing on a pipe, so she walks up behind him and just pulls his legs out from under him. At this point, Bond is recaptured. I believe at this point, she doesn't put him back in the cell yet, right? Like, so one of the mafia heads refuses. He says, "No, I'm not going to do it, and I just want my money. This is crazy. I'm not going to do it." And so Goldfinger's like, "All right, cool. I'll have Oddjob drive you to the airport. Here's your money," and loads him into a car. And like Bond and Pussy Galore are like walking around the compound at this point, and Bond passes the note off to the guy.
He's wrapped his tiny homing beacon in the note and dropped it. He sort of like pickpocketed it into the pocket of the mafia boss as he's getting into the car that Goldfinger's loaded up with the gold bullion that he's giving this guy as payment. It's a needlessly complicated plot. I don't know why he's doing this. Like, the end result of this is that all the mafia people who stuck around, who said that they would help Goldfinger, get knocked out by the nerve gas in the big presentation room that gets completely, like, the windows close, the chimney falls down, the doors lock, and the room gets flooded with the nerve gas, which doesn't knock them out. It just kills them. It's actually just deadly.
That's right.
But this guy, because he said he wasn't into it, gets his money, gets put in a car, and Oddjob drives him away. And the end result of that is that Oddjob drives him to a junkyard. Oddjob kills him in the car. Then the car gets picked up by a giant magnet, put into a compactor, and the car gets turned into a little cube, which then gets picked up and put in the back of Oddjob's, like, I don't know, weird El Camino looking car and brought back to the farm. And it's like, why not just kill them? You had them all in the room anyway. They were waiting for you, but this is because Goldfinger wanted to tell them all about his amazing plan.
Yeah. You're right. I hadn't thought about that, where like, why does he kill all the mafia guys? They were on board.
They all get killed anyway. Every one of them gets killed. The ones that were on board and the one guy that said he didn't want to. And they all get killed in that room. It's like, he could have just locked the room when they were waiting for him to come in and killed them all. But no, he wanted to tell them all about the plan first.
It's not even the actual plan.
I know. And why he doesn't just take this guy and be like, okay, I just got to go give this guy his $1 million in the next room, take him out to the horse stables and shoot him in the head. Like, why he has to do this whole complicated thing? Because when the block comes back from the junkyard,
Yeah.
he says to Bond, he's like, well, now I got to melt this down and get all my gold back out of it. And it's like, that's such a pain in the ass.
I know. You spent how much money now to re-smelt this gold that you already owned out of this car?
And it's such a long sequence, like the whole thing of him being taken to the junkyard and put in the compactor. It's such a long sequence, and it's like, why?
It's fun.
What? It's fun. No, it's great. It's great. To be clear, this is it's terrific. It's just so stupid.
Yeah, it gives Felix something to do, which is nice. Like Felix, at the point in the film where Felix is like, Bond has this all under control. They're starting to get suspicious because they haven't seen Bond at this compound in a while, right? And they're like, what's going on? What's going on? And then he and Pussy walk up to Goldfinger and have a chat while they're like staring at them through binoculars. And he's like, oh, there he is. Clearly he's got this all under control. And then like the beacon goes off the compound and they don't see who they're following, I don't think, at the time, at least not until a little later when they figure out what's going on, because then Felix follows the car that Oddjob is in, and then they lose him at the trash compact or at the car compactor because the beacon gets destroyed. But like, yeah, this whole series of scenes is all nothing. Like, Goldfinger tells all the mafia guys a story about his plan, but it's not the real plan, and he kills the mafia guys anyhow. There's this whole like car chase situation going on where the guy gets sent off, told he's going to be driven to the airport, but then gets murdered and put in a trash compactor, and Felix follows him around and realizes that something is up, but not what, just that like Bond was clearly trying to get a message out, and that obviously failed. So there's no information passed to Felix from this scene. The whole thing exists for us to get a narrative drop that Goldfinger plans to do something, like do a raid at Fort Knox. But we then immediately learn that the story that he told us about what he plans to do at Fort Knox is not, in fact, what he plans to do at Fort Knox at all. So we come back to a scene where
Goldfinger and Pussy Galore are now sitting outside at the farm, and one of Goldfinger's men has noticed that Felix and the other CIA guy are nearby and sort of keeping tabs on the farm. And so Goldfinger thinks, it's a good thing that I actually kept that guy alive. Go get him and take him on a tour around the farm. Let's make sure that they see that he is well and cared for. And they basically are parading him around so that Felix is like, oh, okay, Bond's got this all well in hand.
That's right. And like my favorite thing about that whole scene sequence is they like Bond, of course, busted out of the jail cell earlier. So now when they go down to retrieve Bond, he's like with like multiple guards with guns trained on him with the door open and another guard outside like staring in at him through the door. But anyhow, Pussy gets Bond and proceeds to like take him on a tour of the facility. And at some point there's a conversation that takes place between Bond and Goldfinger during this process where Bond points out that like, okay, so I heard your plan doesn't make any sense because the weight, just the sheer weight of all the gold in Fort Knox is such that you can't move the gold out of there fast enough, even with like an army of men all carrying as many gold bars as they can per person. It would take days to vacate all the gold from Fort Knox. You cannot do it. And Goldfinger is like, you're right. That's not the plan at all. The plan is not to steal the gold, but that the Chinese physicist that he was talking to previously supplied him a dirty bomb. And his plan is to get into Fort Knox and detonate the dirty bomb, which will irradiate the gold and render it like radioactive for the next 58 years.
That seems like an awfully low. I'm sure it would be more like hundreds, if not thousands of years. But the side effect of that is that all the gold that Goldfinger owns spikes massively in value.
Yeah. So it would completely undermine the American economy, throw the global economic stability into chaos, provide a huge economic advantage to the Chinese, which is why they're working with him, and increase the value of Goldfinger's own gold.
What a cool plan. What a great plan. I love it.
He also threatens at the end of this conversation that, like, if the Americans get involved or interfere, he will just blow up the bomb somewhere else in the States and just like nuke a city. So make your choice. Bond also learns as he's sort of walking around that Pussy runs a stunt flying school of like all women pilots is like the thing. Pussy Galore's flying circus.
Pussy Galore's flying circus, yeah.
And these stunt pilots, their whole thing is like their planes are going to be rigged up with the Delta 9 gas, and that's going to be used to like crop dust Fort Knox and knock everybody out.
I should, just to save listeners from looking this up themselves, I should mention that this movie predates Monty Python's Flying Circus by 4 years.
Oh, really? Huh.
So it's not a reference, and I'm pretty sure that Monty Python is not referencing this either. I think it's just when air shows were more common, flying a circus was that's what a flying circus was. They're stunt performers that you would see at an air show. So yeah.
So at this point, Bond basically corners Pussy in a barn and coerces her, I would say is the gentlest way to describe it, into having sex with him.
Yeah, it's really this is actually the part of the movie that I really dislike, not purely for that, though that's a real big part of it, but even if we were to forgive that, which we shouldn't, but even if we were to, it's also just incredibly bad storytelling. That they're walking along, he's like, so that nerve gas that he's going to use, it's actually deadly, right? And she's like, I don't believe you. Why would I believe you? And then they sort of judo throw each other a couple times, and then he starts kissing her, and then she's like, oh, you make some good arguments, and then the scene ends.
Yeah. Like she's clearly resisting.
I'm actually giving it too much credit, because it's like she doesn't even give any indication that she believes him or trusts him or is listening to him, and then he kisses her. And it's obviously gross for a variety of consent reasons, but also, as we will discover, he wins her over. And and we don't find out right away, but he convinces her to not use the correct gas and to completely undermine the entire operation that she was in on up to this point.
Yes.
She had a plan. She was going to get a ton of money and go away to a tropical island somewhere and live out the rest of her life, presumably with a harem of women. I'm just extrapolating from the book. But
yes,
now, 2 seconds of kissy face from James Bond, and she's like, you're right. And there's several different axes on why this is bad, not the least of which is, again, the consent, but also it's just, it's completely unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
It's completely unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
It's for everything that's been set up for this character, for her to be like, oh, okay. It's just, it's lazy.
Yes.
And I don't like it. This is the one part of this movie when I rewatched it that I was like, hey, wait, that's stupid.
It is. I genuinely dislike this scene for all the reasons you have mentioned. I think this scene is gross. I think this scene undermines the whole film.
It really does.
To be fair, the film is not shooting at a super high bar at the moment, because as we have discussed, the whole plot makes no sense up to this point. But at least there's lots of cool, good, iconic stuff in the movie that you can there's lots of surface level stuff in this movie that you can latch onto and be like, that's classic Bond. And for better or worse, mostly worse, this is one of those things that is also kind of iconic because, as you mentioned, they lampshade it. They do it, but they also lampshade it in the next movie, is the superhuman power of James Bond's dong to turn evil women good. And like, it's just gross. It's like, it's one of the things that they have mostly excised from modern iterations of Bond for the better.
I don't even mind the notion of Bond convincing a woman who is doing bad things to have a change of heart and come to the side of good. I don't mind that as a concept. The notion that all it takes is his libido to do it, that's stupid, right? Like there have been times when it has happened through character work that I'm like, okay, this has been much more earned and believable. But in this case specifically, it's instant. They had 2 conversations prior to this, when he woke up on the plane and when she caught him spying on the Grand Slam presentation. She has absolutely no reason to trust him.
No, and she's like been rejecting him constantly up to this point, right? Like she
and then it's just like
shows absolutely no indication whatsoever that this is even in play.
Yeah, like the notion of Bond flipping a villainess is sort of like a stretch, but it's a movie and they're silly movies and I'm okay with that. Him doing it purely through libido is, I think, lazy and bad storytelling. Obviously bad for other reasons, but bad storytelling. But this one in particular, I just think is egregiously unearned and comes out of nowhere.
Oh yeah, I am 100% with you. So anyhow, that happens.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it mostly happens off screen.
Yeah, well, we cut right to the next morning and the Flying Circus taking off and sending out their nerve gas. Like, we cut right to, like, well, let's deploy the nerve gas.
Yeah. So, let's deploy the nerve gas. The Flying Circus takes off. They go to do their mission. We have some really great shots of, like, a military exercises happening and formations and whatnot, and people doing PT and all that thing around Fort Knox, and then the planes flying over them, and them all just immediately falling over like dead. And we watch as like everybody around Fort Knox falls over dead, having now been gassed by gas that we know at this point in the movie is fatal. They name that it's going to gas like 60,000 people.
Jesus.
At some point in the movie, like, or 20,000 or something like that. Like, it's a lot of people that are like, Goldfinger is really evil.
Including, and this is something I only noticed when rewatching it this time, including, and the camera makes a real point to show you Felix Leiter. Now, not that I didn't notice that it was Felix before, but why would Felix be there?
Yeah.
He's right outside the main Fort Knox building. And it's like, it's, you know, you're supposed to go, oh no, Felix is dead. But you should also be thinking, wait, but why is Felix there? Because that note never got to him. So I like that. I like that a lot. But
yeah, that's good.
Goldfinger and all of his cronies drive in disguised at, I don't know why, because everyone's dead as far as they know. So why they have all these US military trucks and everything.
Yeah.
They all drive up to the gates of Fort Knox with it's very strange that it's like Goldfinger and his like 2 or 3 sort of generals and then a bunch of communist Chinese like foot soldiers, like,
yeah,
just as sort of general fodder.
And fodder they will become shortly.
They blow up the gates, they get inside the gates, they use Goldfinger's incredibly powerful metal cutting laser to cut through the doorway into the actual building of Fort Knox. Then Goldfinger arrives on helicopter and they take the bomb inside. The Chinese scientist, Mr. Ling, arms the bomb and then Oddjob handcuffs Bond to the bomb once they get inside the astonishing set of Fort Knox. It's like, obviously this is not what Fort Knox looks like, and indeed it isn't what it was originally going to look like in the movie until they were like, we need to make this look grand. You know, this needs to be a almost like religious, like a temple to the notion of gold. And it is,
yes,
it's just this, it's like 3 stories high. The set has a functioning elevator. It's an amazing piece of scenery. Apparently the people who actually work at Fort Knox sent a letter to them being like, that looks great. So now Bond is trapped, handcuffed to this dirty bomb with a 300-second timer, and everyone surrounding Fort Knox has now gotten a signal that they can stop pretending to be dead.
That's right, because Pussy's conversion to the ways of good has led her to replace all the gas in the planes with an inert, non-harmful gas. She called out to Felix and actually got a message out to Felix saying, hey, here's the whole details of the plan. Here's when it's going down. Here's like what's up. Be ready, basically. And so that is why Felix is there. And so everybody gets up. All the troops get up, and a huge battle ensues, which leads to basically all of Goldfinger's troops being pushed back into Fort Knox, except for Goldfinger himself, who sees that the battle is lost and that everybody's being pushed back, and proceeds to lock the vault with the bomb and a bunch of people inside, and then proceeds to strip off the coat that he's wearing to reveal that he's wearing like a U.S. Army colonel's uniform underneath, and then starts shooting like his own people. Yeah, he shoots Ling, and he shoots some of the Chinese soldiers on his way out, just as some American soldiers are like rounding the corner so that they see him do it, and he's like, they're in there, they're inside the vault, you should get them, and then like makes his escape
After mowing them down with a machine gun from behind.
Oh, that's right. He does. He lets them go past and then turns around and mows them down with a machine gun and then makes his escape.
So inside the vault, by the way, are Bond, Oddjob, and Goldfinger's sort of other like right-hand lieutenant, who is not into the idea of being trapped in the vault. He's sort of like, well, no, hang on. Dying was not part of my plan here. And he tries to break out. And then he's like, okay, well, I'm going to try and shut the bomb down. And Oddjob stops him. And he's like, well, all right, look, if you want to die for this, fine. But I'm going to try and disable this bomb. And so Oddjob kills him.
Yep.
Which is like,
sure does.
Wow, that is a loyal man.
Yeah.
I should add, kills him by throwing him off the top level balcony so he falls down to near where Bond is, meaning that now the key to Bond's handcuffs are near where Bond is.
Yes. And so Bond manages to sort of start maneuvering himself towards his body to reach for the handcuff keys, which Oddjob then like immediately realizes and starts like coming down to where Bond is to try and stop him from releasing himself, because he knows that if he does, he'll cause problems. Bond manages to get the keys, unlocks the handcuffs, and then a fight between Bond and Oddjob ensues, wherein Bond gets his butt handed to him. Bond is not winning this fight.
I love that there's a bit of him like shot putting a gold bar, which are very, very heavy, just sort of like like desperately trying to throw it, and it just bounces off Oddjob like it's nothing. He's just like, boom, whatever, I'm tougher than that. Oddjob also throws his hat and severs a piece of live electrical cable, which will be relevant later in the fight.
Yeah, so they fight. Bond gets beaten upside one side of the head and downside the other. It's a losing battle for Bond. He cannot do it. He cannot seem to do much of anything here until he manages to bait Oddjob to throw his hat at him. Oddjob throws his hat at Bond. Bond sort of manages to dodge out of the way, and it gets stuck in a metal bar, in a set, like a grill of metal bars. And so Oddjob walks over to go grab his hat, and Bond, now like looking sort of disheveled and beaten in the corner, waits for Oddjob to grab his hat and then proceeds to grab the electrical cable and touch it to the bars, which then electrocutes Oddjob, killing him and leaving Bond to finally deal with the bomb. So Bond then goes over to the bomb, which is rapidly counting down as the troops outside are hurriedly, now having like subdued the resistance, are hurriedly trying to open the vault to stop things. And Bond, looking completely out of his depth, trying to deal with this bomb, is trying to figure out what wire to clip or what to do. And finally, with only seconds left on the timer, picks a course of action only for an arm to reach in from offshot and do a completely different thing to stop the bomb, turning the device off, with the timer reading none other than 007 seconds on the clock. I'm given to understand, actually, that it depends on the version of the film you watch, whether it is 007 or not.
Yeah, because originally it was going to be 003. It was going to be 3 seconds left. And then the producers were like, oh, wait. We should stop it at 007. That's way cooler. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. But Bond's follow-up line, which is like,
oh, that's right,
he says like 3 more and that would have been it or something, which makes no sense if it stops at 007. But yeah, they have an actual, like, a scientist who knows what this thing is the one who stops him. And it's great. It's just like, don't do that. I'm just going to do this. And that's it. Because Bond's about to like rip a bunch of wires apart. And the guy's like, no, just click. That's all.
Yes, flip the switch marked off. Yeah. So that is almost the end of the film. Bond's day is saved, but the bomb doesn't go off, and Bond is invited to the White House to have lunch with the president, but Goldfinger hijacks the plane. And as his final sort of like attempt at revenge for Bond foiling his plan, Bond and Goldfinger get into a fight. There is a callback, actually, to the previous scene in the plane, because when Bond wakes up in Pussy Galore's plane en route to Kentucky, she has a gun trained on him, and he comments that, like, well, she's a pilot, she would know that she can't shoot the gun in the plane because it'll decompress the plane and suck them out into outer space, he says.
He very snidely quips, I hope you know more about planes than you do about guns.
Yes. And then in this, Goldfinger again has a gun on him. He has his revolver, and so Bond and Goldfinger get into a fight, struggling for the gun. In the process, the gun goes off, and that blows out a window, explosively decompressing the plane, and Goldfinger is sucked out of the cabin through the ruptured window. Bond then proceeds into the cockpit of the plane, where none other than Pussy Galore is flying the plane. The plane crashes in the ocean. They bail out with a parachute and end up on like a tropical island kind of thing. And a search and rescue helicopter passes overhead, but Bond says, well, this is no time to be rescued, and hides them both underneath the parachute, as it is presumed that they're going to go at it again, as they are wont to do at the end of Bond movies. But the implications of this one are a little more troubling. And that's Goldfinger. We got to the end. That's the movie.
And then it says the end of Goldfinger, but James Bond will be back in Thunderball, with yet another shot of presumably Jill Masterson's lifeless gold body with video projected on her.
Aha. So what did you think?
It's interesting because I had always had it in my head that of the early Bond films, like the first 4 or 5, the first sort of the Sean Connery batch, that Goldfinger was my favorite. And rewatching it now, I don't think that's the case. It's very good, and there's a lot of parts of it that I like. Best bad guy so far? Goldfinger, absolutely. Like, Dr. No was great, had really good sort of like monologue with Bond at dinner. The ostensibly like the bad guy in From Russia with Love was, I guess, Red Grant, who I enjoyed their back and forth in the train. I mean, it's a little more nebulous in From Russia with Love because there's like Spectre in general and Frau Klebb to an extent. So it's like, I don't know who the singular bad guy is, but the one that Bond interacts with is Red Grant. But in this one, the back and forth between Bond and Goldfinger and their trading of barbs, and how Goldfinger is in many situations a step ahead of Bond, and of course just the great, like, the monologuing and the no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die, and Goldfinger's unnecessary presentation of Operation Grand Slam and everything. It's just he's great. Goldfinger
Yes.
is terrific. The actual storyline, like I love this about not just Bond films, but sort of like spy movies in general. When it's like, here's the thing, he's smuggling gold. That's the thing, and then it turns out no, he actually has a much bigger plan. And the idea of no, we're not going to steal it, we're going to irradiate it so it's useless, so that my gold is worth more, is terrific. I love that. I think that's excellent. But I think I overall as a spy caper, I think for me, From Russia with Love ekes this one out, though I still think this one is very strong, with the massive asterisk of that part that we talked about a lot with this the just the really like bad storytelling, unearned character flip of Pussy Galore, of just being like, suddenly I'm a good guy. It's not. And how is she still, how is Goldfinger not figured that she was part of the problem? Like how is she still on his good graces enough to be part of this hijacking plot at the end? That's very weird. Which is a shame, because Honor Blackman is great, but they barely got to actually do any judo.
Yeah, I mirror that sentiment. I think I had the sort of realization that this was not my favorite Bond movie some years ago now, or not my favorite like Sean Connery Bond movie some years ago now. So I was coming back into it expecting to be like, it's fine. I think for a lot of people, this is the one, like, again, it's like, think of a Sean Connery Bond movie. This is the one that everybody thinks of. And like, I think a lot of people would name this as their favorite Sean Connery Bond movie, and I kind of attribute that to a lot of the surface level details in this movie, where like the villain is great, and the iconic moments are so iconic that they endure today, and like there's a lot of cool, fun stuff that happens in this movie, but on a mechanical level, this movie just does not work. Like the actual mechanics of this film are very, very bad. And the actual, like the story mechanics of this film are, as you say, lazy and kind of gross.
I mean, I don't mind it overall, except for that. Like, is there stuff in like the setup that really doesn't work for you?
Well, I think like, I don't know. I look at From Russia with Love, where like one of the things I said that I really liked about that movie is like how many different things are happening in that movie, and like how many different agendas are working against each other in that movie, and like all of it executes, right? Whereas this one, we literally, without even dealing with the like flipping Pussy Galore's character, we had a whole big chat about how there's like the entire second act of this film does nothing except exposit false information. And there's just not that much going on in the movie, right? Like they are manufacturing twists and turns out of a pretty straightforward plot. We're going to irradiate the gold so that my gold is worth more. And they're like making...
Yeah, the whole thing with all the mafia bosses is, yeah,
that go nowhere and accomplish nothing for the main story. And so like it's fun. I love all these movies. It's a fun movie. I would, if this came on TBS one afternoon, I would absolutely watch it. I'm not being like, this sucks. But I think the gross parts of this movie skis me out pretty bad. The parts of the movie that don't work very well just don't work very well for me. But I think the highlights of this movie are very, very high and easy to grab onto as like, oh, well, that's super rad though. I think it's an easy win for From Russia with Love on my power ranking. I'm a little iffier on whether I actually like Dr. No better than this. And I think I do. I think this is maybe number 3 for me at the moment.
Interesting.
Yeah. The first 2 movies are really good functional stories that also have cool stuff in them. And this one just doesn't meet that bar for me.
So I agree with you for everything that you said, but I think that in terms of the parts of this that are very fun and James Bond silly town, I think ekes this out ahead of Dr. No for me.
That's totally fair.
But I still think, and I would not have called it before I started rewatching these with a much more, like I said in the first episode, the critical eye of, I'm going to have to talk about this on a podcast, that I am realizing that, yeah, From Russia with Love is definitely the best of the three we've seen so far.
Cool.
Having said that, in terms of the other things that we sort of have been ranking, opening titles, I think this one is the coolest so far.
Yeah.
The gold
Yeah.
bodies is just really, really cool looking. Opening song, it's not even a contest. Goldfinger
Yeah.
for sure is the head of the pack by a country mile at this point.
Absolutely.
In terms of the pre-title opening stinger, I love this one for everything that I said, where it implies this wider world of James Bond, that you're seeing the tail end of another movie that doesn't exist. I really, really like that a lot. And it's just a cool little moment. Like there's an explosion and there's a gadget and there's a fight scene. And, it's got sort of like all that in just like 5 minutes, and it's really, really good. That said, it's really hard to top like James Bond killed before opening titles.
Good. I'm glad you said that, because that was going to be my argument as well. Is like, James Bond dies in the opening moments of a film, and it's your second film. That's like, yeah, this one locks in all the iconic elements of the opening sequence, but the first one is a way better hook.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's tough. It's probably From Russia with Love, but I don't want to say that, because it's like going forward, it'll be like, well, this was an amazing stunt and it was super fun to watch, but they didn't kill James Bond, and I don't want to set it up that like no other movie can surpass that one. But I think From Russia with Love just with the edge here.
Yeah, I think so too. And for what it's worth, I think it's totally fair to say From Russia with Love opening sequence is better than the Goldfinger sequence, even though the Goldfinger sequence locks in the sort of like iconic version of it, because the sort of iconic version of it is done way better in future films. So there will be plenty of opportunity for that, like that style of opening to take the lead here. It doesn't have to be this one, although the dead seagull hat is really truly a marvel of cinema.
It's so good. It's so stupid. It's so good.
It's so clearly waterlogged when he takes it off. It's like my favorite thing. So I'm with you on that. I think From Russia with Love has the best opening sequence. I think this has the best theme song by a country mile, as you said. And I think this is my number 3 film, whereas it sounds like it's your number 2.
Yeah, I think that's about where I'm at.
All right, cool. We sort of glossed over this, but most Bond moment?
Ooh, that's tough. There's a lot of good one-liners. I really like how he stays ahead of the flight attendant who's trying to spy on him. But I think it might be most of the golf game with Goldfinger, particularly the like, no, I can tell he's cheating because I'm also cheating.
Yeah.
It's very like, no, I know that's not his ball because I'm standing on his ball. It's like, they're like, oh, you cad. How about you?
I'm trying to think of mine. Again, this is just like an iconic, silly thing. It's not even really like a Bond moment beyond just the fact that it happens in a Bond film. But I love the ejector seat. I love the ejector seat. I love the obvious dummy strapped into the ejector seat getting catapulted out of the roof of the car, and the little like interaction between them that happens when it's at like between Bond and the henchman that's in the car that happens just before he ejects him from the car. I also love the other henchmen all running over to see if he's okay. Like it is a fun, stupid moment that pays off the like, this is the big gadget. Q is even like, never touch that button. You never touch that button. It's the ejector seat. Don't. And Bond is like, really? You're joking? You put an ejector seat in this thing? He's like, well, now I've got to know.
Yeah. Now I have to poke it.
Yeah, I think that that probably stands out for me as like just the thing that I would glom onto as like very Bond. I mean, the most iconic Bond movie moment is him being strapped to the table and like the laser, right? Like that is the most Bond moment of any Bond moment that has ever been a Bond moment. That it, like, if you're going to parody a Bond moment, that's the Bond moment you parody. I'm going to call the ejector seat sequence my Bond moment of the film.
Awesome. That's a solid pick.
I think that brings us to the end.
Yes, I think that does bring us to the end. So next time we will be looking at 1965's Thunderball, which in North America meant 2 Bond movies were released in the same year.
Oh.
Goldfinger came out in January 1965, and Thunderball came out December 1965.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot of Bond in 1 year.
It really, really is. I was looking, I should say, I looked this up before we started, and I assumed that there was this like massive gulf in Bond movie production at one point, but it actually, the longest period between Bond films, I think, is 6 years between Bond movies being released.
And that would have been like Living Daylights and Goldeneye?
Close. License to Kill and Goldeneye. Yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, 1989 to 1995. And, that's a big 6 years, 89 to 95. But, obviously the first ones were like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 6, 2, 2, 3, 4, 2. Wow. 6. Oh, I'm sorry. Quantum of Solace and Skyfall was also a 6-year gap. No, that was 4 years. I'm sorry. 4. 3, and then 5.
Right.
So
they've stretched out a bit over the Daniel Craig era, but this is not, at no point has the Daniel Craig era been the longest wait.
Yeah, I assumed for whatever reason that there was like a big 10-year gap in there or something, but no, the longest was leading up to GoldenEye.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. So next time, Thunderball, 1965, with Terrence Young returning to the director chair for his final Bond film, but it would not yet be Sean Connery's, not even by a long shot. So until then, a reminder that this show and everything we do is brought to you by you and your kind support of our Patreon, patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. I know it's mentioned in the end credits, but I wanted to shout out to Featherweight for the wonderful art that he provides for these, and Matt for helping me out with the visual editing of this. If you're listening to this, you don't see it, but if you're watching this, you see a lot of still images and stuff put in to the video part. I want to thank Matt for Matt Griffiths for the assistance.
Yes, other Matt,
that.
Not me.
There's 2 Matts helping with different aspects of this. One of them is my co-host. Thanks, Matt. It's been great.
It has. Thank you.
So, that'll do it for this time. From Rewatch with Love, we'll return.